So with that, open up for questions, comments.
Pete or anybody else can certainly give comments, but you talked about filtration at a lot of farms and improved break rates, but obviously it comes at a lot of cost. Would you say that in hindsight, all of those retrofit filtrations were good decisions this far out? Has the cost been worth it and justified with the improved performance?
Yeah, so when you try to peel the cost out for our remodels, it's pretty tough because we actually, so those farms were like 20 years old at the time we remodeled them, and we were needing to do a lot of upgrading anyways, and then also converting to pen gestation at the same time. So we have never really gotten to a true number of what the actual filtration cost was, but generally speaking, when you look at some of the numbers from the first year, side-by-side comparisons of some of the ones we didn't, we're like, oh yeah, that's paying back. And now we're getting to the point now where about 5 to 6 years into some of the older filters where we're starting to budget for replacing next year. So we're feeling pretty good about, I think going into it with a realistic attitude of it's not going to be zero, but, we're definitely can see year after year we're continuing to keep the prevalence down on those farms. So
I would like to just comment on that too. I would say the short answer is yes, well worth it. And the little bit longer answer is you don't do your first filters in the boundary waters of Minnesota. You do them where the PRRS is the most difficult and the most infections that you have. And so you got to think about the population you're comparing. You're comparing herds that broke a lot, like generally every year or less. And so that break rate is really different than if I look at a herd that breaks every 4 years and look at the outcome. And so you got to be a little bit careful how you look at that data and interpret it. But I think the farms that have put the filters in, it would be a definite yes. And two things. One is, I think there's two things you don't know until you don't know until you do it. Is the bump up on performance. Is you finally get a good parity distribution. Because you're not always closing the herd, you're not always dealing with having to run a bunch of animals into the herd. And the other is then that downstream performance.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is, so we've got some sow farms that we would consider to be in a low pig dense area, which would not be the boundary waters of Minnesota. And so those farms we've had a pretty good PRRS break rate at historically, and so we have not chosen to filter those as we remodel them, because we're not sure the payback would be there on those ones with PRRS break rate already at about every 4 years type thing. So.
Like Paul or Pete, I don't want to ask Amy. I know what her answer would be. The multi-strain approach for vaccination in sow farms, the MLV multi-strain PRRS approach, I guess, what is your thoughts on the benefits of it, and has it made a difference in the 144?
Well, my problem with any of the MLV products, any of the modified live products, is that unfortunately when we look at the sow herd and we look at the late gestating sow, late-term gestating sow, none of them are good enough. And I think we have to set our level of expectation of what are we going to do. I think what we see with it is better performance out the back end, a little quicker time to baseline production, and hopefully a few more pigs out of the system. As far as doing the different programs, I'm not sure we know how to measure that well enough to really be able to comment well on that.
I'm going to let Amy comment anyways because I want to see what she says.
This will be the truth in the story.
Oh, I guess I don't know. We've tried. It's hard to say if one is working better than the others. I mean, I know when we had some of our first, we were doing some downstream with one product and some with another product. And so when we had some of the first 144 breaks that were really nasty in the late nursery type time frame, we felt like at that time that maybe the Prevacent was a little better based off the numbers, but that's not a controlled situation. It's just, I don't know. It's hard to say. It does seem like, and I think some of the data that we've worked with Rodrigo on is that, if we go in and do a whole herd Prevacent, like as soon as we think there's a break going on, our losses are reduced quite a bit with the 144 strains. So, and that and putting those pigs on feed meds right away, I think those two things have shown through our multivariate model to make probably the biggest difference on anything we can do on the front end of a PRRS outbreak.
And my challenge to all the researchers in here and to the vaccine companies is I think it's the level of desperation we're at. So we need to keep working. We need to keep getting better answers as we go forward.
Can you go through your LVI as far as your dosing, how many doses that you'd like to give, time of the year, better? Do you avoid summer months with the heat? Every animal on the farm, including your GDU, how nursery guilds?
Yeah, when it comes down to dose, I don't think there's really good research that tells us what that dose should be, what that magical number is. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it because I don't know what the real number should be. And that's another research hole, another research question that could be answered is where's that dose really need to be? And generally we do the whole population. I don't want to leave a hole there. And that's why I put up there 1 or 2 doses, and some people do the second dose just to make sure everything's covered. And oftentimes the second dose is really a non-event because everybody got it on the first dose. And time of year, we really do it when the herd, when we saw some of these first 144s come through, you got to wait till the sows feel at least good enough to do it. And so you sometimes have to let those herds stabilize a little bit before you get to that point. Everybody's in a hurry to get the herd back to good production, but sometimes you got to wait till the sows are feeling good enough to do it. But we do all pigs that we have on site just to make sure we don't leave any holes for the virus to come back to haunt us.
Can you give me an estimation about your CT in your inoculum?
Yeah, we do. We go ahead and do the viral numbers, and generally it comes down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 mil does 200 to 300 sows. Kind of depends upon what you're getting for concentrations in the piglets, what you're harvesting.
So for us during closures, we'll use anywhere from 2 to 3 mass herd vaccinations, including every animal on the farm. When it comes to those, we kind of have a sequence timeline of when we administer those, have extended where we do like a 30, 60, and actually a 120 when we look at those timelines. And then from an LVI perspective, we have a number of genomic copies per mil that we've looked at that we're trying to use right now for how we look at that, but have actually done less LVIs in the last couple of years than we had previously. I think, frankly, just because of the severity of what strains we've had hit our farms, that we just felt like we're a little nervous to even utilize that in an LVI manner, frankly, than compared to what we did in the past.
Mine is not very scientific. If it's a lower CT, I mix it a little more. I don't 1 to 1 to 100, 1 mil to 100 is kind of my rule of thumb. But if it's like really hot CTs, I probably go like 1 to 2 or 300. And then if it's like CTs that I think are a little borderline, I might go a little heavier. But I don't like. I'm kind of the same way. I'm like, I feel like any time I've ever tried to figure it out beyond that, I'm just trying to outsmart myself probably. But the one thing I would say is we do, like I said, on those mini closures, we do a lot of like, we've done injections, we've done where we go and we'll mix it and then we'll spray all the sows right on we'll get like the front of their nose all covered in blue, reload pack. And I don't, this is just our, numbers, but we have not seen a difference in success rate or length of closure. And we've done them about 50-50 when we've done full closures over the last 5 or 6 years. Now that's not, I've not run statistics on that. I'm just saying if I look at them side by side and look at the success rate in the weeks. So I don't know. And that'll be multiple. We'll spray everything multiple times. But the one thing I would say is nothing makes me feel worse than injecting a sow herd with PRRS and having them blow up on you. And I've never had that happen when I've sprayed them. And I don't know if it's maybe an indicator I didn't get as good of exposure, but I know when we used to infect pigs experimentally, we do them injectable and intranasal, because if you just did it by the intranasal route, you wouldn't get as severe lesions in the lungs. So it makes sense to me that maybe it's just route of exposures a little bit to do with how severe they react reproductively, but that is not scientific, though. I will pretty much nothing I say will be. So
while you get the microphone, Pete, would you mind elaborating on the mini closure? What it is, how is that different than the full closure, and when do you implement that?
yeah, I mean, we pretty much, if we start to have a little bit of, if we have a farm that's endemic and we start to see more prevalence, like in the processing fluids or more downstream issues, or if there's a reproductive blip, then that's kind of when we do it. We don't do it every time we enter gilts or routinely, but a lot of times we'll do it going into the fall, like ahead of pumping season. We'll just load them and kind of get right there to that point, and that seems like a good timing to get to keep the health kind of stable through. And then the other time we tend to probably do more is like coming into this time of the year when we're coming out of the spring. But the main thing is, I guess the main thing is this is not a herd where we're going to be able to eliminate virus, but if we can get things relatively on the same page and get viremia down to real low level, we seem to have a pretty good run of production out of the farms. And they're just farms where we just don't have, there's not a lot of support to be able to eliminate viruses just because of it doesn't make sense in our system, at least from a pig flow standpoint, getting pigs to market, financial standpoint to eliminate it and then break again, 4 or 5 months later.
So one question for Dr. P. Thomas, So here, so you mentioned that currently you use the acute vaccine, and in some countries they have a commercial post-acute vaccine, and some they tried to promote use those instead of the MLV vaccine. So I'm just curious, you use this commercial acute vaccine or just acute autonomous vaccine?
Yeah, this would be an autogenous vaccine. I don't think there's any commercial vaccines.
Yeah, not in the U.S., but that's present in some other countries.
Paul Yaski on herd closure. Some people say if you do herd closure, you're gonna have a severe hit in productivity. If you ask Paul Yaski, he answers not necessarily. So can you walk through how to do herd closure with the minimum impact in the throughput?
Yeah, I think the most important factor is to make sure you get when you do the herd closure, is to make sure you get as many animals as you possibly can into the unit, and somewhat being creative with space at certain times. And so you're trying to get as many animals as you can on site. If you've got an on-site GDU, it's a lot easier. If all I've got is I'm bringing select weights in, it's a lot more of a challenge. But the issue that I see most farms getting into is the managers say, Doc, I should call that sow. And I say, yep, you should. But you're not going to, because she can have another litter. And the inventory sneaks out the back door. And it sneaks out the back door because they're used to doing that. And we've taught them to do that. And so the biggest thing is maintaining that inventory. Once you know what you have for an inventory to work with and how many animals you can get in the unit and how many you got there, then you can start working on, okay, this is how many we can let slip out the back door, and making sure you bring enough. That those younger animals, you can put a little higher density because they don't need as much square footage, and you're going to call some sows out and you're going to make some square footage for them over time, so it's going to correct for itself, and you're going to be okay because they're coming in at a lighter weight. The biggest challenge that I've seen farms run into is we bring, like I say, 2 months of those gilts that I want. If I'm going to do a 240-day closure, 2 months of those gilts aren't even born yet. So how am I going to bring them to the farm and they're not even born yet? Well, I got to bring them older, and I got to make them last. And if I keep them and I breed them older, they're going to get too fat and they're not going to do very well. So we breed them up, and then we start skipping the P1s and P2s. You get the advantage of skipping the P1s and P2s. So when your inventory is down, you're getting more total born per sow, and you get those animals bred up at the time they should be bred up, but you keep the numbers for later on. And that skip pool kind of generates itself for about 6 weeks and can help you fill that void, fill that gap again, you got to maintain the inventory. You can't let them slip out the back door.
I would add one thing that I think Paul alluded to it when he was talking earlier was McRebel procedures that I feel like from a production standpoint we've talked about a lot in our team of that. If you're at the beginning of a herd closure, every animal on the farm probably has PRRS anyway. So getting more pigs out the door and not restricting yourself on piglet movement has been a win for our team, and utilizing those processing fluids to make the decision of when you are and aren't going to use McRebel. Because at the end of the day, we want pigs out the door. And so if you restrict the animal movement, you don't allow for cross fostering at the very beginning of the closure, I think you restrict yourself from a production standpoint of just getting more wean pigs out the door. If they have PRRS or not, they likely are going to on 3 to 10 weeks post the start of a new introduction of a strain anyway.
And in the past, we didn't have the tool of processing fluids to help us guide us to that decision, and so we had to go on time. And so if you read the older literature, it all talks about starting it on time. And now we've got more tools. We know more. We're better equipped to make that decision. And so I think if you go back and reference the older stuff, you're going to be driven to ending up with forcing yourself into higher pre-weaning mortality, and you have to early.
So what I hear you guys saying is, as long as there is evidence of several negative processing fluids in a row, then you don't worry much about McRebel. Is that?
No, that's the time you want to start McRebel. You don't start it until you have multiple weeks of negative processing fluids, and then you start the McRebel because it's going to pay off. Because now I've got negative pigs, and if I don't move them around and I don't contaminate them, I'll have negative pigs at weaning. And so that's my first indicator that it's time to start.
Is there a drop dead week?
Yeah, I don't know if there's, that's a good question. Is there a drop dead week? We usually are trying to get there because we want to get gilts back. So about week 20 to 24 of the closure, we're working pretty hard to try and get it negative, whether we've had negative processing fluids or not. But then we're going to go start taking a look harder at gestation and say, start testing those aborted sows and start saying, do we still have activity in gestation, or something changed in gestation that's different?
Question. What we heard today from a biosecurity standpoint, that there's a lot more virus around than there used to be. So the question for you three is, have you made any biosecurity changes within the last year or two to help protect the sow farms, or were you perfect up to that point already?
So a couple.
Biosecurity/biocontainment, right?
Yeah, not perfect at biosecurity, but we have had a few initiatives around our system to try to be better. I would tell you jokingly, today I spoke to a truck driver that drives truck, does custom application, and owns 26,000 spaces. So I just stood there and thought, well, we have a long way to go. We're going to be talking about PRRS next year and the year after. But across our system, we have started utilizing what we call reporting. So trying to create that awareness on the farm, because I think at the end of the day, it's people execution of getting supplies, themselves, animals, and now the farm that becomes one of the biggest risks for our system. So we've increased our reporting and our training platform across our system to try to create awareness of the why we do certain things. One of the other things we spent a lot of time on in the last couple of years is transport biosecurity, and having that transparency to not just are we washing and baking trailers, but what is happening in the cab for those drivers. Where are those drivers going on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday? An example I can give you specifically as we look at transport is that there are multiple calls that our herd vets have with our transport team in a couple of our regions of the system where they have transparency to what is scheduled for every load every week, the week or 2 weeks before those loads are scheduled. So if there is some new break, they can try to bio-contain that and communicate more effectively with our transport team. Are we perfect at that? Absolutely not, but it's one of the kind of two areas that we've tried to make an effort of how do we control this better within our system. And
I'd just like to comment on that too from a biocontainment side of that coin. Daryl, you woke me up to biocontainment, and we did an outbreak investigation, and I'd like to thank Daryl for bringing it up and calling us on the carpet and saying, you got to start thinking about that more. And I think as an industry, we haven't done a good job of that on how do we keep the virus from getting out into the greater population. But as you think about herd closures, and that's what we're talking about here, you really need to think about biocontainment from the wean pigs down to the pigs that are being born that are negative. And so you got to think about an internal biocontainment as well, is how do we limit that virus movement within the farrowing house so we don't drag it backwards. And then we don't want to take it off the farm either. And so I think as an industry, we've not done a very good job, or at least myself, I'll speak to myself, is we haven't done a very good job of biocontainment in the past. And it's a real opportunity for us to do a better job in the future. And I think there's some actions going out there on how we can do different things, but I definitely think it's something we've got to continue to work on.
What are some practical things we can do to improve that biocontainment? What are the tools we have?
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me in the outbreak investigations was that a bunch of the people don't shower out of the sow unit, and it's like, what do you mean you don't shower out of the sow unit? Well, that's one that's set up and can be done easy. Just got to make sure everybody does it. And how we handle, if we're composting on site, we say composting on site, great, we got good biocontainment of our mortalities. But if the person goes out there in their street clothes and does the composting at the end of the day and then goes down to the quick trip after that, that's not great biocontainment. And then I think we got to start thinking about the grow finish side too, and what are things we can do on these grow finish sites, from how we handle mortalities, how we handle people going back and forth between the sites, and load crews and vaccination crews and all those sort of things all become important pieces to that puzzle.
A couple things I would just maybe tack on. Probably everybody thinks I'm like the transportation Nazi or the truck wash Nazi. I probably got like these crazy ideas that whatever. But the one thing that drove me crazy is the wood chip trailer, like guys just go up in the wood chip trailer and like drag them along the floor with their boots and throw them in the back of the trailer after it's been baked. So we bake all of our wood chips. All of our wood chips go on racks in the bakers and they get baked before they go up into the truck. So that's something we kind of do that hopefully help in that area. And then the other thing on transportation is what we're looking at. I know everybody's probably dealing with the same issues with the shortage of CDL drivers. And so we're seeing more and more where we got guys hauling feeder pigs on like a Friday and then coming back and hauling breeding stock for us on a Monday. So they got 3 nights down. But, they're supposed to have some different boots that we have at the other truck wash and stuff like that. But I think we're in the process of we're going to move to basically all of our loads for gilts are going to be all no-touch loads. So we already have the farms unload all the trailers because the gilts are coming off anyways. But I trust the sanitation, the baking process more than I probably trust people every time to do things the right way. And so that's one thing. We'll have the gilt sites. Right now, we do have the ones, the transition rooms loading trailers, but we're just going to move to all the gilt grow out sites. Will load the trailer that are going to our GDUs. The GDUs will load all the trailers going to our sow farms and take the driver out of the equation on those. And I think that'll probably help. I don't think there are going to be a single driver complain about it either, so that might help too.
One thing, when we had the discussion with the group this morning, and for the people in the feed industry that are in the room, get ready. Butch Baker came up with what I think might be a great idea for the sow farms. Was he said some parts of the world they have double bagged feed, and so you can tear off that first feed bag, and then you got the bag still to come into the unit, and so it's more bags, but maybe the next biosecurity move.
Daryl would probably disagree with me on our transportation biosecurity. He was at a fishing site where we had, I'm not sure who she was, but the driver made sure we knew it wasn't his girlfriend with him and a dog. So, sometimes.
Yeah, it's probably not as foolproof as we think it is, but a lot of times, is it? Yeah. Do we still have time, Daniel, for...
We do.
Okay. Well, Mike, I wanted to follow up to your question because I've had the same question, and that is it feels like we're making progress, right, in terms of we're doing a lot of things better in terms of biosecurity control measures or biosecurity practices, but yet when you look at what's happening, we're not really making any progress. You said there's more virus out there. than it was before. I think that's right. I think nursery finishing sites, if you manage to get a group of pigs all the way to market in Iowa, you should go buy a lottery ticket because you got lucky. And so what's going on there? Why is that? I think my opinion is that, and I'm going to ask you guys if you agree, but my opinion is it's not all about biosecurity practices. The other side of the coin is the hazards that we have in place, right? The things that put our farms at risk. And I'm just going to throw out one example here that's happened, I'd say, in the last 5 to 10 years is more and more reliance on contracted services, contracted livestock hauling, vaccine crews, loadout crews. We turn that over to a third party, and it's a complete black box. We don't know who's involved in that. We don't know how they do it, when they do it. Maybe we know that, but we have very little control over it too. So that's just one thing, Mike. I've thought about a lot of others, but I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts or comments on that too, in terms of maybe why we're not making progress is because we're adding hazards faster than we're adding control measures.
I think that's a good challenge. I would tell you that that's one thing that our team is trying to approach. An example I can give you from a contracted crew perspective is literally 2 weeks ago, we rolled out the facilities and assets biosecurity processes because I know you've alluded to all the construction projects that we do on farms on some of these older assets. Our health team has created a document, an outline of like when we have a contract crew come in and do a construction project and you've opened up the whole side of the farrowing house. This is the procedure for how to get items in and how to get items out, because a lot of times we define it very easily of everything's going to go through the fume room or EV chamber. Well, that's a bunch of small items. What happens when you have to bring a bunch of gates and new feeders and XYZ into a farm, and how do you manage that? Are our definitions today perfect? But that's one of the things that we're trying to do to manage it. But I would tell you that from pumping, other things like that have entered the farms, I don't know we have perfect answers today, but I think it's a fair challenge and something that we need to continue to address of what are the expectations for some of those other external contractors coming into our units. And we're trying to address it, but are we perfect at keeping it out? Not today.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right, Daryl. I think as we continue to work harder at production and have more labor challenges, we just continue to add more hazards, and you get more crossovers and you get more emergency situations, and you've got less people that are as well trained as they once were. Once upon a time, people used to be able to fix everything on the sow farm. Then you get maintenance crews, and nobody can change a light bulb without putting in a work order for a light bulb change. It's not quite that bad, but that's one of the things that does happen that adds hazards. And you got more people coming in, and we do have aging facilities. I think the aging facilities add a lot because you got to do a lot of maintenance and a lot of upgrade. And oftentimes when we come through and do these investigations, they're following some major maintenance. And so I'm not blaming the maintenance guys. It's part of the process, and we got to get better at that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a risk for sure, but it's hard. It's always hard to know exactly how much of a risk it is. But I mean, we know for sure we got times where crews take hot shots or sort boards off of panels, bifold panels off of sites to go take to the next site. For sure, I mean that's like a huge risk, right? Taking or when they can't trust that they're going to have the equipment they need at the next site they're going to for vaccinations or something like that. We got times where load crews obviously are just trouncing through the shower, and who knows, it probably didn't shower back out, and they probably went to the mash off site next or something like that afterward. But or like we get a vac crew, like we had some APP outbreaks, and we had a vac crew come and treat them, and we say, okay, we need can't go to another site for 48 hours or 2 nights or something. Who knows what they're really doing, right? I mean, probably, well, we won't go to another Iowa Select site but, and so we started treating those ourselves, some of those, but I mean, there's a lot of layers when you start peeling back that onion of things. And I mean, I don't know, I don't think there's any way to know when you don't have direct control over the crews, when you're hiring those independent contractors to do that thing. to do those things. We do have a crew supervisor who works for us. We started that position a couple years ago where they can go out and do some audits and try to help communicate. Bilingual person. Gustavo, you know him pretty well, I think. But anyways, so they can go out and communicate with the crews and get them the things they need, hopefully make sure they got hot shots. They have somebody they know they can go to, and they got to make sure they have the stuff they need to get the job done. But that's still, I mean, it's probably a part of it, but hard to ever get that 100%. But when I was a kid, we also used to take pigs to the sale barn with the same boots that we wore back to the farm. So I don't know.
That was before PRRS.
More comments, thoughts, questions? Amy, one final one. I appreciate all the factors that you listed out there on things to help you make decisions on PRRS management, right? If you, for every 10 herds that break today, how many do you guys do herd rollover versus repopulation? Is that different from 5-10 years ago or not? Maybe a question for all of you, but Amy, you would start that.
Well, until this year, we probably would have said elimination, but based on markets from a coal sow perspective, as well as gilt prices, and the severity of some of the strains that we've seen this year, we've done more depops this year than we have in the last several years.
Yeah, I think that's our case exactly. We've seen, people have looked at the economics, they've looked at what's the outcome of this break going to be at the end of the day, how long's that tail going to be, and that's driven them to that decision. And the call sale price certainly helps. You know, that's like the icing on the cake. It makes it easier to pull that trigger. The biggest challenge today is getting gilts.
Yeah, probably take a lot of different approaches. I mean, 2-3 years ago, we were trying to, eliminate PRRS as much as we could, and then the last 2 years have been bad years, I would say, for gilt grow outbreaks, and so we kind of budget a typical year for extra gilts that we'll have in the system, so we can dump them if they break with PRRS. And the last 2 years, they've been gone pretty quick, and so then at that point in time, so last year we had 3 herds in herd closure where we were about halfway through the herd closure, maybe a little more. Things were looking pretty good, but we had gilt sites break with a strain of PRRS that matched what those farms had, pretty dang close, at least on the OR5. I didn't do the whole genome sequencing. But so we use those gilts as replacements in those farms. Otherwise, we were going to run really short as a system, on gilts and, just huge impacts on our parity and sow longevity and production in general. And so it's, we had a couple other examples on farms that weren't. So it kind of depends year over year. Right now, we're getting back in. We're actually, with some remodels we're doing, we got some farrowing houses down. We're going to take advantage of some gilt, some, not overbreeding, but still breeding for the system, where we're going to take advantage of some of those and do planning on a series of about 6 depops over the next 2 years, utilizing a site where we're breeding gilts. And then some of the farrowing houses are going to be down through some of these remodels. So trying to be, being dynamic and flexible and not having, set in stone opinions on every single thing that goes on is kind of what we try to do to keep, try to balance health and production.
All right, got 4:05 here. Just about time to move on to the next module. Would you help me to thank again the speakers from this module? Thank you.